Yeah. So going back to the overcorrection kind of goes into one of your philosophies of efficiency over being effective. There's a quote from Peter Drucker: "Efficiency is doing better what is already being done."
I cannot reinvent the wheel. I exist at a point in time when that invention has not only existed for so long, but to go against that now would change everything that we're basing current civilization off of. So there are very few bits of design space left in that department. Does that mean I shouldn't strive to build a better wheel? I can't make something to replace it, but I can still try to find a better wheel. Now, just 100 years ago, we still had a large portion of our population who did not have automobiles yet. You think about the mid 1920s, you still had people going to the grocery store on their horse. They still did. And although it was known at that time that, the horse is not necessarily any cheaper than the automobile. One of my favorite jokes from my significant other, Madeline, is if you want to make a small fortune in the horse industry, start with a large fortune. The people who had automobiles, they understood that although it's a different kind of cost, you're changing feed for fuel and you're trading, the upkeep of that animal and keeping them warm and cozy for, changing your oil and checking your tires, different kind of upkeep. But one eventually just completely outclassed the other. And now I couldn't imagine. It's like, got to go to Trader Joe's. And I know it sounds like it's an old timey West thing, but if you showed up to Trader Joe's on a horse, those hippies are going to look at you real weird. They're going to, as they turn away from their granola for a second, they'll be like, is that guy on a horse? So we have effective. Did it work? Then we have efficient. Did it work better? And I think the problem is too many people, especially early on, they just want to be effective. They just want a thing to work. They want it to be good enough. The problem with effective is it leads to kind of like a fool's demise where you start getting into this habit of, well, it took me 5 days to do this thing. I could kind of gaff it off and I made my deadline. So now I'm going to get into this habit of doing that all the time because it worked. And without any kind of other constraints or rigors saying, hey, do this, hey, do that, I'm going to keep doing the same thing I had done because now it's habit. Whereas, is that the best way? No, and it's probably not. So when it comes to martial arts, I'll have a student do a move and I'll teach 3 or 4 steps to the move. And the student will skip a step thinking that made them efficient, not realizing that was a critical part of the movement. And now they're going to make up for it later with extra steps. They're adding more work to their plate because they didn't hit every step. They thought they were efficient by cutting something out. Not everything that's efficient is small, and not everything simple is easy. So when we say something like, oh, jiu-jitsu is simple, not easy, what we mean is I apply enough pressure to a limb or your neck. Eventually, you'll say you don't like this anymore, and we stop. Yes, it's simple. Do that on somebody who knows how to fight. Do that on somebody who's bigger than you. Do that on somebody who just doesn't want you to do anything. Now, you're a younger man, but have you ever had any experience changing diapers on an infant? It is a miserable, miserable experience. And I will just use this as an analogy. First-time parents or people who are changing diapers for the first time, you can be given the most clear and concise directions possible for how this endeavor takes place. And you can look at the subject matter and say, that's it. I just have to beat this thing, this small object. What's the worst that can happen? And you go into it overconfident because of every attribute in your being, but you don't have a working knowledge of the subject matter. So you can only assume based on your preconceived notions of what your confidences are and your abilities, and they're all unfounded because you don't have any on-the-job training. You've never done this task. So you think, I got this. Easy. You go over, and all of a sudden, you're getting kicked, you're getting scratched, you're getting screamed at, you're getting defecated on. None of it's great. And you walk out of this like you were in a scrap, right? Now, you ask somebody on their second, third kid, they turn into like a NASCAR pit crew where it's and they're out of there
Yeah.
because they have that working experience. Now, that 10-pound bundle of joy just beat their butt. And that same person who remembers that experience will come to jiu-jitsu and be absolutely confused as to why a 15-year-old girl just took their lunch money. And I have to explain to them, maybe that 15-year-old has been training for 4 or 5 years. They have the working experience of what to do. You thought you knew what to do. Now let's upscale that 10-pound baby into a 150-pound person. Now, I'm not saying that would be that young teenage girl in the story. I'm saying like make it somebody else, but like take it scaled up. Now that we've increased it 15 times over in size, try to change that diaper. Wait a minute. You had trouble with it when they didn't have the physicality or the size or anything else, and they were just doing gross motor skills. Now you have somebody who's been around the block a few times, may or may not have been in a fight once in their life, or has just trained in the academy long enough to know certain signs and stimulus to do a move, and they're acting accordingly. You haven't trained before, but you listen to, a certain podcast and you think now you can take on bears. Great. The ground is not an ocean. You are not a shark. You are a human being trying a skill-based endeavor against people who might have already built those skills. You're probably going to have a rude awakening in terms of what you're capable of. So one of my favorite quotes, and Samantha Fallhaber is responsible for this. She said, "Jiu-Jitsu teaches men they're not as strong as they think they are, and women that they're stronger than they think they are." And the strength comes from different ways, right? Because a man in question might have a certain physical strength, but maybe not a mental strength, as you were talking about. And the ladies are most likely not going to be as physical, but they're going to have a mental toughness. And the thing that kills me is that I watch mental toughness break every day. And the physical toughness, when that breaks, where do you go to reserves on? Your mental toughness. But do you change it to a physical thing when your mentality breaks? No, you just lose. So it's funny how, and I'm not going to name names because I don't want to embarrass any of my students, but I have a certain set of young blue belt men who get their cages rattled all the time when they just don't perform to the level that they expect they should when they're grappling, say, one of our silver foxes, one of our older grapplers, or one of our ladies, and the ladies are getting them. And that's great because it's showing that your physicality can only get you so far. And we still have to manage this based on our skills.
It's like the Zen of Python that you like to reference. Simple is better than complex. Complex is better than complicated.
Got to thank my brother German Quintero for that, because Herman, he is the one who turned me on to the coding language of Python. And the first thing he did after we did our first, hello world experiment was he showed me the Zen of Python, and I went, whoa, that could apply to jiu-jitsu. It really could. And for a little while, I had an LLC called Function Jiu-Jitsu, which was just the F of X.
Mm-hmm.
And it was cool because,
yeah.
Because what are we trying to do? Well, we're doing this task. Great. What's the function of it? And so at its core, we're trying to figure out a functionality. And I got really hip into that and trying to make it so that if you're writing a task, if you have to do it in 2 lines, it's probably better as 1. If it has to be 2, make it an elegant 2. And to that point, just because something is simple didn't mean it was easy. Trying to say something in the simplest terms can be some of the hardest stuff you've ever tried to accomplish. But even just yesterday during our morning class, I was saying to one of our other black belt instructors, Dennis Brongan, that if I can't explain it simple enough, then I myself don't know it well enough as the instructor. Because it should be my job to make everything digestible to the layperson. It doesn't really matter what the context of the move is. I should be able to break it down Barney style and everyone should pick it up. If The instructor only cares about sounding smart. They're leaving their students in the dust. And now it's an ego thing where the instructor is like, look at me, I'm cool, I'm smart. I have this knowledge and you're not getting it as easily as I am. Whereas my job should be to proliferate the art and replace myself with many, many versions of me at a state higher than when I came in so that everyone's more prepared to push the envelope in the next generation. It's a relay race where it's not me against my student. I'm actually just running my neck of the race, trying to catch up to what is eventually my student in front of me. And then there's a part of that race where we run neck and neck, meaning my student will be almost as good as me in that moment for a piece of duration. And I pass the baton. And if we're not timing that perfectly, that handoff doesn't happen really well. And then what happens after I get that baton in their hand? I let go and they run their race. And now it's on them to progress the art, and it's for me to retire and chill. Just like for a period of time, if you don't think I was neck and neck with my instructors, that happened. It has to happen. That's the natural order of this. Now, who's in the other lanes at this track? Other schools, other martial arts. It's not me running the race for my students against lions, against, caimans. It's me running that race against the other martial arts out there to make sure that our students can handle themselves if they were to go to a judo tournament, a sambo tournament of this, and grapple somebody in that sport or fight somebody in that sport. Or even just one side of that track has the untrained. Can you at least beat them in this race? Now, I don't care if we finish first, second, third. We cannot finish last. We cannot be the worst of the runners. So once we get that down, that it's us running our own race, what the job of the instructor is, what the job of the student is, and who runs which part the hardest, and how that hat changes from instructor to student. Great. How many laps are there going to be? And then we could start having that discussion on what the martial arts will look like after the third lap, after the fourth lap, after the fifth lap, because it's only getting crazier every year. And that's why we're constantly breaking world records at the Olympics. We're getting better. There's never been more knowledge about the martial arts than now. And that's because we can open source so much if we choose to.
So everything is kind of like everywhere all at once. Like you go on the internet, you can find anything you want. You want to figure out what an armbar is, you can just search it up and boom, now you have everything you need. What's your thoughts on the readily available convenience of everything versus having that emotional connection or the emotional effort of putting the work in, even though it might take you 5 hours to learn it, but instead of just conveniently, boom, I learned it, I put the effort in to learn the new thing.
Okay. Could somebody learn an armbar off the internet?
Yeah.
Could they?
Yeah.
Yes. Statistically speaking, are they going to learn it better off the internet than from an in-person class?
Most likely not.
Okay. And if you get to an in-person class, does the caliber of your instructor matter?
Yeah.
Okay. So now we have a huge range where there's access to something that's free, but not necessarily a great amount of saturation of that material in the form of you see it, you learn it, now you can execute from that medium, all the way to in-person training. And then that changes with a huge spectrum based on the level of the instruction. I usually say good jiu-jitsu isn't free and free jiu-jitsu isn't good. And the reason I say that is because when you have this one side of the equation, which is, yes, the knowledge is out there. How many people can just pick up that knowledge and immediately apply it and make it work? And because of the amount of people that don't come out of that side of it with all the things they want, you can't really worry about that group. The knowledge is out there, but it's still better for us to be in the lab, so to speak, testing it and retesting it with resistance against a training partner under the auspices of somebody who understands that part of the game in a safe way and at a knowledgeable and is knowledgeable enough to share with us the shortcomings and the successes that we might have. And that's where the best growth is going to come from. So not to say that you shouldn't ever go out and seek other resources, but they're like supplements. You can't just go to a nutrition store, buy a bottle of supplements, and be like, it's got 100% of all the things I need, and eat those pills. You still need the substance of your regular diet, and then you can supplement and add. When we have people that have tutorials out there or free content online, great, soak it up in addition to, but it should never supplement. It should never replace. It should only add to. I don't say, oh, can't go to Jiu-Jitsu tonight. Let me watch an hour of videos online. That's going to cause a habit where now anytime you don't feel the urge to get up and be proactive, you immediately revert back to factory setting mode, which is go to the couch, go to your chair. That will become the death knell for your ultimate training. Because once you start getting in the habit of getting out of going to your school or going to train, that just becomes easier and easier to do every time.
Yeah. So there's the convenience, but then there's also efficiency. If you do something because it's convenient, because you can easily get it, it's not as good as it being more efficient. Even though it might take more time, you'll retain it better and more efficiently. Like if you just went online, you learned how to dry fire and everything, that's not as efficient as actually going to the range and getting rounds into a actual target.
Correct. Even if you take it a step further than that, let's say you were discussing it from the point of view of, I'm trying to learn any skill. We know that there's a degree of someone should hopefully explain what the task is. Maybe I do a mock imitation of it. And if I have access to somebody who can make a correction to that imitation step of it, now I can get into the practice stage of it. And I think the problem is people get to the practice stage of things before they've gotten to the stage of, is it even correct? And then you start practicing a thing, not realizing you're building habits in the wrong way. And once you build a bad habit, they're hard to break because it's like digging a hole. The more I dig, the more dirt I got to put back in later. And so I've dug this huge hole on these reps that are all poor. Now I've got to fill that hole with all those reps. I got to do the exact opposite to get myself back to even. And then I've got to dig a different hole for something else later. That's annoying. And so how do we bypass that? It starts with first recognizing what the task is and what the appropriate response level to learning the skill is.